Good afternoon, guys. Today I'm just going to go through some common subject and verb agreement errors, try to walk you through some of the common issues that students face and how to fix those problems so that you can make sure that you have subject verb agreement in your writing. All right, our first one is just the plural rule, and I wanted to kind of give you some similarities between those two. When you think about making a noun plural, typically we add an S. But when you think about making the verb plural, we take the S away. Now there are some exceptions to those rules. For example, we have what we call irregular verbs. Verbs like do and does. Does would be singular, do would be plural. We also have and has. Has is singular, have is plural. And then is and are. Is singular, are is plural. And you notice that they're pointing to the S. I want to remind you of the rule about the nouns versus the verb. Remember that an S on a noun means that it is plural, but an S on a verb means that it is singular. All right, so here's an example of that. The girl dances. All right, we know that our subject is girl. Girl is singular. Dances. Dances is our verb, and therefore dances must be singular as well. In order for a subject-verb agreement to occur, the subject has to be singular, the verb has to be singular, or the subject has to be plural, and the verb has to be plural. But look at girl. Girl has no S, therefore the verb has an S. And on the very next slide, you're going to see that in reverse order. You're going to see girl with an S, and then you'll notice that the S has been taken away from dance. So our next rule is dealing with multiple subjects, or what is sometimes referred to as a compound subject. Most often compound subjects are joined by and. All that means is that your subject is more than one. And if you have more than one subject, you must use a plural verb. You have the example below: the boy and the girl dance. And so boy and girl means that the subject is plural, so you must have a plural verb, which will be dance without the S. All right, so now we also have subjects that can be joined by or. When you have subjects that are joined by or, you're going to take the subject that is closest to the verb. That's the verb, or that's the subject that the verb needs to agree with. When you have subjects that are joined by or, you're going to take the subject that is closest to the verb and make that one agree with it. Look at the example: the professor or the students walk the halls. All right, your subject is professor, and then your subject is also students. Since it's joined by or, you're going to choose the subject that is closest to the verb. And in this case, it would be students, and your verb would be walk. Students is plural, and walk is plural. Let's also look at the next example. The students or the professor walks the hall. All right, so students, again, subject, professor, subject. In this case, professor is closest to the verb. Professor is singular. Therefore, walks must be made singular in order for it to agree. So professor is singular, and then walks with an S is also singular. All right, so when you're dealing with indefinite pronouns, um, with indefinite pronouns, you have some that are going to always be singular. That means that they're always going to be used in conjunction with a singular verb. Then you have those that could be either singular or plural, depending on how they are used in that particular sentence. So indefinite pronouns, you have some that are always singular. That means you will always use a singular verb with it. And then you have some that can be either singular or plural, depending on the context of the sentence that they're used in. So relative pronouns refer or relate back to a noun in the sentence. So in order to determine if you're going to use a plural or a singular verb with those, you must determine which word or which noun that relative pronoun is referring back to. And then there are also some cases where they can be either singular or plural, depending on how they're read within the sentence, similar to those of the indefinite pronouns. This can be very, very tricky for students when you're trying to identify the subject and the verb, but you have a lot of words that separate the subject from the verb. Sometimes you may even have a prepositional phrase that separates the subject from the verb. But your task is first to determine what the subject is, and then what the subject does or is doing. And that way you can eliminate those words that are between the subject and the verb. And this will ensure that you still make subject-verb agreement within your sentences. All right, so this little activity is just something to determine how well you have retained the information that I provided to you. You can do these sentences and try to identify the subject and the verb and whether or not they agree. If they disagree, then you want to make them agree. On the very next slide, I have gone through and identified the subject and the verbs for you, and then I will tell you which ones agree or disagree and what you need to do to make them agree. All right, so let's look at these. Some of them were a little bit tricky. You had to really determine what the subject was and then identify the verb and make sure that they were in agreement. All right, so the first one, they, goes. All right, your subject is they. Your verb is goes. They is plural and goes is singular. So therefore, they do not agree. It should be they and go. Number two, Harry and his friends once. All right, our subject, Harry and his friends, which means that it is plural, and you must have a plural verb along with that. So it should be want, no S. All right, the cat is your subject, and then once is the verb. Cat is singular, once is singular, therefore they agree. All right, neither the cat nor the dogs likes. All right, this is one of those that is joined by nor. Remember, when it's joined by nor, you must find the verb and the subject that is closest together and make those two agree. So in this case, dogs would be your subject. It is plural. Therefore, you need a plural verb, which would be like with no S. All right, the mayor as well as his brothers. In this case, the subject is plural, and you must have a plural verb, which is are. So these two agree, right? Nobody wants. Nobody, singular. Wants is singular. Therefore, these agree as well. And then finally, the paper or the ruler are. All right, this one is joined by or. So that means that we have to look at the one that is closest to the verb. And in this case, that would be ruler. Ruler is singular, therefore you must have a singular verb, which would be is and not are.